is Jolanta Jagiello, and I work at Middlesex University in the Business School, and I'm going to be talking about the organisation of theatre of learning, and I'm going to be talking about it in an educational context, but I'm also going to be talking about how one can take out some of the aspects of it and work it into a business by talking about one of my students, Jill Bradner, who's developed this within her business called Resound Training and Development. I'm going to talk about three aspects that basically make up the model, then I'm going to talk about the model, and then I'm going to talk about some feedback that the students have had in the use of it. It's been used on the MBA, it's been used on the MA, Human Resource Management and Human Resource Development. And the idea is to really provide a learning environment where you can use the forum theatre technique to if you like, bring organisational issues to light and play around with the possibilities of how to resolve them. So part of the components of this is having a climate of learning, and this is really from the creative and innovation climate. So if you've gone to Andy's lecture, he would have mentioned some of this, and this is Evol's work. Environments where people can challenge, there's freedom, there's aliveness, openness, ideas can be generated, conflicts can be managed, there's debates and risk-taking. And hopefully in educational environments, some of those things can be provided for the students. The other thing that's really important, which has also been mentioned throughout the day, is the learning organisation. This is Peter Sengi's work. And if you actually think about it, most organisations have various systems, some of them working really well and some of them not working well, and inside those systems that are not working well, problems and issues arise. People have a series of mental models about those. In relation to trying to solve them, sometimes perspectives is a really good idea, but sometimes a shared vision on the problem is a good idea. Personal mastery is really important to solving problems, and hopefully there's an aspect of team learning as well. Now, for those of you, I don't know if you are familiar with the forum theatre technique, but it was developed by Augusto Boal, who's a Brazilian theatre practitioner. And he used, and it came out of work that he did based on the theatre of the oppressed, where there was the oppressed and the oppressor. And what he was interested in is problems that existed in communities where his team of actors would go in and they would kind of find out these various issues and problems, and they would then perform them back to the community, and the community would be able to say to the actor, well actually could you try a different way of solving this problem? And they would be able to say to the actors, well could you say this in the situation, could you say that in the situation? And usually the person who was the problem owner would have what's called a criteria of acceptance. There would be certain things that perhaps, or certain solutions that might be tried out where the person who was the problem owner would say, no, that's not something that I could entertain at all. There was always an audience, and the audience was always the community members who could make, neither tell an actor what to actually do or say differently, or sometimes the audience members were trying to tell the actor what to do and the actor not being able to understand it, would actually come on stage, replace the actor and actually go into the scene and try something differently. Which, what it would mean is that the other actors in the scene, who'd obviously been working off a script, would now start improvising, and they would have to stay in the character's motivation. So they would only yield to something if they felt that the person had made an intervention in relation to their value set. Then what would happen is that if the person who'd been observing what was going on in terms of the problem owner thought there was anything that had been actually done that was interesting, they might actually go and implement that action in the community. So if we actually look at how this works in an organisation, in an educational context, if I'm running a forum theatre workshop with my students, I would put them into groups, very small groups of 3, and I'd say to them, okay, think of a problem and issue that you've had, neither in the past or currently in the present, that is unresolved, that's something that you're unhappy about, and get them to actually script it out. Now, then there will be a 2-hander, and they would have an opportunity to actually play that out to the other students. Now, what gets really interesting if you do it that way is who plays who. So, for example, if I've got a problem with somebody, do I do I act as me? Okay? Only I can act as myself, only I can know my value system. That's then called a first person perspective. Okay? And I would get another person in the group of three to play the person they were having a problem with. However, that might be not the best way of doing it, because it might be more beneficial for me to play the problem person, the person that I think I've got an issue with, and see it from their perspective, and see myself, someone playing me, actually trying to create a resolution to the situation. And I remember there was one very interesting time where we had a manager who claimed he had this problem with his secretary because she never took the initiative, she couldn't produce things on time, she didn't know what he wanted. Anyway, so in the scene that he created, he decided he was going to play the secretary and someone else was going to play him. Now, I don't know if you remember that wonderful scene with Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada, where she keeps swanning into her office and she basically keeps throwing down her sort of fur coats and sort of demanding the secretary does this, that and the other. It was almost like that. The person who was playing him would sort of swan in, dump reports down, and expect the person to understand when all the deadlines was. And he actually got quite furious playing the secretary, and stood up and said, "How dare you treat me like," in the role play, obviously speaking to himself, the person playing himself, "So how dare you treat me like that? You don't give me this, you don't give me that." And then suddenly there was this absolute moment of realisation where he thought, "Oh, I see what I'm doing to contribute to the problem." The other way to do it is not to be involved in the playing of the scene at all, which basically means you have someone playing you, someone playing who you've got the issue with, and you stepping outside. That's called a system perspective, where what you're doing is watching the dynamic between you. All right? So if you're playing the other person that you've got a problem with, that's called second person perspective, just to kind of give you some notes on that. Now, so if you want to create this organisational theatre of learning, it's not about these small little scenes, it's about, if you like, something which perhaps grows. In other words, there are things that you could have done that would have resolved the problem earlier if you'd acted, but it didn't happen. So then it went up another level, another level, another level, another level, and it sort of builds up. And at each point there are what's called these kinds of critical incidences where different actions could have been taken but perhaps weren't done that. So in relation to, this is just some objectives, but if I actually go through the actual steps, it might be a little bit more informative. So the idea is to create what we call like an organisational script, which is a set of scenarios that when intervention is not made early enough, the situation, if you like, escalates. At a particular point, you could have had options of things to do, and they're what's called the predicted interventions. Then you have an opportunity to act the whole of the script out. So what you do is you act the whole thing through to an audience, and the audience gets an opportunity to see the whole thing, if you like, escalating, and will probably be thinking, "Oh my God, somebody shouldn't have said that at that point, or did this something differently at that point." So when it's rerun, on the rerun, the audience, say that's yourselves and there's a scene happening here, you can make interventions to try and change the dramatic course of action. And so you can either step in for a person in the scene and try your intervention out yourself, or if in a context where it's done, say, in a business environment, that's a little bit threatening, people can tell an actor and say, "Well, could you say this or do this instead of what you've done before, to see if you can change the reaction of the person that you're in a scene with." Then, if you've got this script of these predicted interventions, and then you've got what actually has happened with the audience, you can actually check whether the predictions and the actual interventions are the same. And that's quite interesting because you can get quite a bit of sort of learning out of that. Now, in terms of what types of organisational issues are the best to use these kind of forum theatre techniques, it's usually the ones that involve things like bullying, harassment, bribery, the ones that are really, really difficult to deal with because they're usually based on value systems. And interventions by people usually show up different value systems, different ways of tackling the problem. Settings, this is just an example of some of what the students have done. There was a wonderful scenario where where the students, most of them who actually worked in a hospital, had done what was called the dead body on the ward, and what they predicted was that somebody would die on a trolley and be left there, and actually what then happened is it happened in real life. So actually they, knowing the circumstances of that hospital, they actually wrote the script, do you know what I mean? And they did all the interventions into how to stop this happening, and then sadly it did actually happen for real. So there's this aspect of scenario planning that actually comes into it. Schools, care homes, banks, all sorts of environments that they've done. The script normally has 8 critical incidences in it, and there's 3 to 5 different courses of action. Some are policies, some are around fairness, some are about sort of being more ethical. If I'm going to, I'm wondering, yes, audience interventions are really important, and I'm just going to give you an example of an audience intervention, and they can happen at any point. So for example, we had a vice president of a company. This was the scene that was being played out. He just landed, and he just got off the aeroplane, and the project executive, or the senior executive, was meeting him at the airport, and he wanted to try and get an important meeting in relation to some research he'd undertaken, which could save the company £7 million. So the scene gets played according to neither how he envisaged it or how it actually happened. I can't remember which way. Anyway, and it sort of went on and on and on and on, and we didn't really get to a resolution where actually the vice president was really listening to the person. So we got into the rerun of it, and whoever's playing the vice president gets off the aircraft, and he just walks into the lounge, and we get a stop, and someone says, I want to make an intervention. We think, well, nothing's happened, he's just got off the aircraft, he's just walking in. So the person steps in for the person, walks straight up to the president and says, do you want to save the company £7 million? So the president just looks up and said, of course I do. He said, in that case, we need to... And it was interesting because it's all about a person who can make an intervention can be braver, perhaps, than the person who actually works in the company who's going, listen, sir, I'm terribly sorry for interrupting you, but, you know, and if you can imagine somebody coming off an aeroplane and they're really tired and they've got this person just being really apologetic. So it was really interesting intervention about just cutting to the chase of exactly what it is that you wanted to say and achieve. So the interventions are really good ways, particularly if you get up and you actually do the interventions. It's very easy to give advice. Okay, it's very easy to say, oh, the person should have said this and done this and blah, blah, blah. But when you actually come up and you replace the person, and also you need to talk to them, you get a reaction from the person that perhaps you didn't think was going to happen, and you have to manage that reaction. So it makes the theory come into practice. There's a lot of emotional learning, and I've just highlighted some of the learning that people who've used this technique have got in. One is not prejudging a situation. If you prejudge, people close down on you and they don't tell you information. So for example, we had one intervention by one manager who, because he went into the situation not judging, the person opened up and gave them some information which no other person in any other intervention got. Sometimes it's important to tackle the feelings rather than the issues, or get to the feelings first, get them out, which you sound really upset, or you're really angry about this. And sometimes silence was really, really powerful. Actually not saying anything, making an intervention and sitting there in silence with the person to see what would actually happen. So you can assess this, obviously, in an educational environment. We need to kind of work out frameworks of assessing this, and the way it's done is through the script. The students produce the script, that can be assessed. The running through of the script, the performance of the script, together with the rerun, with the audience interventions, can also be assessed. And the other thing that can be assessed, which is probably the most important part of it, is really what do you learn from making an intervention? In other words, when do you make an intervention? So where in this organisational acting out of this script you make an intervention? Why do you do it? It's because the person was treated unfairly. because it's an unjust situation, because the person doesn't know what to say. There's usually some reason which you feel compelled to step in and say, I'm going to try, or you want to say, oh, this is similar to something that happened to me in the past, and I wished I'd said this. This is a very similar environment here. I'm going to come up and say this. So what is it that you actually said? What was the actual intervention? Then, what was the reaction to it? Did you get the reaction you thought you were going to get? Did somebody say something completely different? Did it bring a resolution to the situation? What did you learn? And then basically, how would you apply that learning in situations? This is just some feedback from one of the participants, and this is something that he just felt. It was a very interesting technique, the forum theatre technique. It demonstrated the important personality perspectives, provided on critical feedback on performance and discussions, provided a mechanism for mutual learning about discussion tactics and engendered teamwork and participation. So really it sort of encapsulates some of the things that I spoke about at the beginning in terms of the learning organisation. Now, just to talk about it from a business context, I've got here some flyers from one of my students who runs a business called Resound Training and Development, and these are some of her professional actors who actually act out the scenes to the people in the audience, and the audience guide the actors in relation to what they would like them to say. So I'm very happy to leave some of those, and I'm also really happy to take some questions.
I'm very interested to know whether you use this mainly with people who are coming in as a group from, say, health, or it seems to me you need to have quite a lot of shared context to do this well.
Actually, it is quite interesting you should say that, because if the audience is from the same organisation, they find it much more difficult to make interventions because they can't see the same opportunities. If you have an audience that's mixed from lots of different backgrounds, particularly say public and private sector, you find that people are intervening and the others are going, oh, I never thought of doing that because we would never be able to do that in our organisation. Do you see what I mean? So it really, I think the more diverse your audience is, the more interventions you get that really challenge the mindset that's, if you like, that's creating the organisational problem. Yeah.
And have you used it with masters and
primarily with master students. We have used it with undergraduate students on the service encounter, where they've looked at it more around sort of customer service. But the students I think that get most out of it are the ones who've got quite a lot of work experience and who've kind of got these things sitting in their psyche from the past that they've neither thought, oh, you know, obviously I'm not in that situation anymore, but I wished I would have known how to resolve this better. So, for example, we had a team leader, actually it was a team member who'd been promoted to a team leader, and he was going to have this meeting in the future with one of his team members, and he was terrified, absolutely, because she was really intimidating. So he was brave enough to play the scene out, and I must admit the lady, or the student that was chosen to play the intimidating team member was brilliant. And it wasn't what she said, it was the way she did it, the way she looked at him. You know, and I mean, I don't get intimidated often. I thought, oh my God. And he was playing himself in that scene, and the fact that he actually, got through it in one piece, because I said, without soiling my pants or running out of the room because he was so terrified. And he got all these fabulous interventions of other people managing the situation, meant that when he went back into the workplace, he felt really much more confident in tackling that meeting. So he was using it as a rehearsal for a future meeting where there was a lot of fear attached on how to manage it effectively.
Okay.